And we are live. What is going on out there today, guys? Brent Abel here, webtennis.com. That young man over there, the great Jim McLennan. Mac, what is going on? Early for you this morning? No?
Well, not exactly early, but I do like your intros. I'd like to, maybe we could script the intro because can you do more than great with me? Maybe not today, but longer.
Oh, with the great? Well,
Longer.
what's your preference? I mean, like, when you go to USPTA conferences and they tee you up, what do they say? I mean, what do you ask them to say about you?
Typically,
great.
Say, if I drone on too long, the door's at the back of the room. Maybe the same.
Okay.
Some of these coaches talk too much. You know that.
That was, when
You don't know that.
No, I do know that because when I first started teaching, I thought, well, the value of what I'm charging, don't I have to give away a lot of information? Don't I have to blab the whole time? And I think when I hired Doug King at the Moraga Country Club in 1980 something, probably about 1980 is my first, no, 1978 is my first assistant pro at Moraga Country Club. Courts 11 and 12 are the two teaching courts. And we were side by side, and he was not saying very much, but he had these terms that I eventually became to know as Stoicisms, and as in Tom Stowe. And within a couple of weeks, I could see his students were getting way better than mine. And so that's where it all kind of started for me. Look, for Owen McIntosh just said legendary with the Jim McLennan. Mac, for those of you who don't know you, who've never had the benefit of being introduced to you, give us your 60-second background.
Well, I played all my life. I grew up in Lafayette with Blackie Jones. Then I met and worked with Tom Stowe. And then I met and worked with Don Kerr. And then I went back to school to try to make sense of all this stuff. And so my life has been about playing and studying tennis. And even today, I think our talk is somewhat obscure about whether gravity would help you move quicker. But I still play with all these concepts, and I'm very much aware of what you said, that even where I work, some of the coaches have or do talk a lot. And I still believe that there's an assumption that when you were using all your words, there was value. And lately I attempt to do almost no words in a lesson. And it doesn't work for everybody. Some want the words. So maybe you would have a checklist for people and say, do you want words? Yeah, really.
Okay.
I mean, what do you want?
Qualified.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. Give us a little background on essentialtennisinstruction.com. It's funny because did a little prep work on this morning's show, and I just Googled your name and gravity step, and the first thing that came up was John Yandel's thing that he did with you. I think it was 1998.
That's right.
So, which must have been like one of the first online, and there was actually a little video, which I thought was kind of interesting in 1998, knowing that we didn't have high speed at that time. We just had dial-up. So give us a little background on what you've been doing at Essential Tennis Instruction, when you got started with that, and what are you helping your students with online right now?
Wow, good question. I was working for Tennis One for about 20 years, and then John purchased all the assets and moved them over to his site. So that's why you saw that video. And then about 10 years ago, my next door neighbor said, let's build our own site. And so I pushed back for a while, and then I agreed. And now he's moved away, so I'm trying to figure out everything myself. And I'm not as skilled with the computer as you found out this morning. But I'm trying to simplify the game, and I'm trying to write about basic ideas. And that's what Tom was about, dead hands. That's as basic as you can get. And that's as hard to do as anything. Or even the time, I often think about this. My first lesson with Tom, he made me sit on a stool and turned the stool slightly to the side. And then I started volleying. And, you know, you couldn't ask a question, you couldn't complain, you just had to simplify. And I think that balance is something that is almost never understood. That's stronger than misunderstood. And, you know, as much tennis as you play, I think you can spot in the warm-up if somebody's off balance. And I think you can expose them. And what I notice even with this footwork stuff is that many people use their feet differently to run to a forehand than they do a backhand. And that's how I met this guy, Don Kerr, was how I was using my feet. But, you know, we've talked about how complicated and detailed all the instruction can be or is even online. And so I'm sort of an outlier. Even I sent you guys a note about sort of a coaching checklist that's really, I don't know if you read it, but it's really tricky about whether or not a coach ever tries to get closer to what the issues about change are in a student, and whether we can change them or they want to change, or we don't even change them, but they discover how to change. So, you know, I keep reading this stuff. I guess the other thing is that troubles me is that I get some journals, and many times there's a accredited scientist that will write an article about how to build an explosive forehand. And yes, the rackets can do that, and yes, the game is about that. But if you're dealing with just sort of regular people, it doesn't feel like that's an issue. And what I notice at our place is that most of the explosive forehands either create injuries or they go out. That's why you have so many titles, right? Well, it's true.
Well, no, like, I mean, look, if we go back to Mr. Stowe, I know you spent probably a lot more time with him than I did. But when I first got there, all we worked on was balance. I mean, the first 20 minutes of and I was fortunate enough to be with those three other guys who were all top players, Doug King, Steve Stefanski, and John Hubble at the time. And even with those guys, the first 15, 20 minutes was all without tennis balls, but just kind of ballroom dancing around the baseline, trying to find the balance, trying to find the right posture. Because Mr. Stowe said, if you don't have this part down, how am I going to show you any kind of simplified stroke technique?
Well, you even mentioned once that he would interrupt and come in and grab your hands and move them to a different position. Did you remember? In other words, it mattered how you carried your hands.
Exactly.
He called it the carrying position. What a concept.
Yeah. Well, all right, let's get to it. Let's talk about footwork, specifically the gravity step. And let me do this. I want to bring up the video you sent me.
You can cut the audio if you want, or leave it in.
Yeah, no, I've got the audio turned down. And let's do this here.
Shea Sue.
Yeah, hold on for 1 sec. Let me make sure I've got what I want here.
Sort of a modern version of
there we go.
Fabrice Santoro or even John McEnroe. Strokes aren't typical. Wide stance, outside foot, hip turn.
So let's kind of look at it in slow-mo first, and then I'm going to have you go back and kind of pick it apart and explain to us, Matt, your concept of the gravity step.
So I presented this in many different places, New York, even London, to a lot of resistance. And the step is actually very common in basketball. And sometimes they don't call traveling on the ball handler when they use that foot. And so I'm living in New Orleans and I meet this guy, Don Kerr. And he was a one-legged tennis badminton coach, lost his leg in an accident years before. And one of his businesses was teaching amputees how to use a prosthesis. And even if I could put my hands, well, I'll wait a moment. His idea was that if you turn your hips in the direction you're moving, and she doesn't turn fully there, but she turns a bit, and drop the outside foot, you're initially moving because of gravity, truly. And it's not for everyone, but generally, very quick players do this. And so I did a project where I got the rights to Stefan Edberg, who used that footwork when he was volleying. And I presented a video in New York one time of Pat Cash, who was doing the same thing. But if you watch, Federer will sometimes do it, Nadal will sometimes do it. They don't always do it, nor do you need to do it. But the dialogue can be, how do you move to the ball? What do you prefer? What are you aware of? And really, do you ever think about efficiency? Efficiency. So she's very agile. And I think agility is just, can you move quickly and easily?
So let me ask you a question. The way you describe it on the gravity step is that you are slightly off balance.
Absolutely.
Okay. So, and I think you were the one that showed me some study or turned me on to some study about that. If we get off balance, that to reorient ourselves is we look for a stationary object. Was that you?
Yeah, actually, on balance boards and so forth, you've got to find a vertical or a horizontal on a wall somewhere to recapture your balance.
Right. Okay. Okay.
Yeah.
So since we're tracking a moving tennis ball,
right,
which is not a stationary object, if we start off balance,
yeah, how
do we deal with that?
Well, that's a good question. I wish you would have asked me before we started this interview. I think I'm going to get
because look, I mean, she doesn't look off balance to me here. I mean, look, she sinks into her split step, and it looks like she's perfectly on balance.
But now she, and so, I mean, I guess I would say that my experience was, it took me quite a while to relearn this move, but it felt like it was somewhat easier to get around the court. That's all.
Okay. All right.
You know, if you walk into a sliding glass door, do you hit your knee or your foot or your forehead? And the answer is you hit your forehead. So walking is falling too. And so anybody that's out there, I've got a lot of footage of Edberg. I've got footage of McEnroe. I can find the footage of Pat Cash. But the story is, Brent, and I guess even though I said I'm trying to simplify tennis, this story gets complicated. The easiest way to learn this is just to practice exactly on the baseline, without a ball, exactly. And you use the baseline divider to split your stance. And anytime you move anywhere, you have to step on that baseline divider because of your hip turn. That's all. And gradually, and I have some students that can learn it immediately, and others that can't feel it, and others that do it one way and not the other. But I remember years ago watching Connors playing Yannick Noah, and Noah was running to forehands and shuffling to backhands. And Connors would stay on his backhand for 4 or 5 shots, and by the 5th shot, Noah would be late. And so, to me, if you're being trained to shuffle to the ball, that's an ambulance walk. Right. You're a little slower, but if you're strong, you can do it. And Brent, if you look, I would bet there is somebody in your elite level of tennis that moves very easily without much work. And I think you'd see that step.
So is this also the drop step as opposed to the jab step?
It's the drop step. The jab step is the shot.
Right. So this is more for if you've got to cover some ground rather than the ball being played pretty darn close to you. I mean, the ball being played pretty close to you, you're not using it. You're not using this step. You're using more of a jab step where this foot right here initiates it
Yeah,
correct? Yeah.
100%, 100%. But
Okay.
I think that even the to me, when you talked about Tom having you do ballroom dancing around the court, and even he used to tell me to rehearse 5 minutes a day, and I didn't really do it as much as he asked. Now, when I rehearse, I can put that step in, and it doesn't have to be a big step at all. But to me, the thing about Tom that is similar to this is that Tom was all about turn. To me, that was the word I remember, and that's the word that I hope my students one day will remember. And so if you turn your hips, it's very tricky to do a jab step. In fact,
Okay.
a jab step typically precedes the turn. And so this is the opposite. But who knows? I mean,
I'm telling you, though, she still looks on balance in terms of being able to visually track the incoming ball.
Yeah.
Her upper body sure looks, at least her head looks on balance to me to be able to track it. So,
Oh, totally. Yeah.
Now, did you get any of this from Tom, or not knowing that you got this from Tom? Or, what would he say? What would he say about this right now?
I think that Tom was critical when I was taking too many steps. The steps were too loud. I wasn't smooth. And so without him going into this concept, he was about that. I mean, I had to glide to the ball. And one magical day at Silverado, when I wasn't in trouble with what I was doing, I heard him mumble to somebody, "That's how it should look." And I was playing well that day, but I think it was, even I just put up a post about biomechanics and whether or not really can biomechanics measure whether somebody's smooth? Can biomechanics measure whether anybody's effortless? And Tom was all about that. You know that too. It was like you had to swing slower and hit harder. And, people go, well, what's that about? And so I think you're carrying on this tradition of Tom, and others are, not many. And I'm sure there's some good coaches out there that embrace some of this, but it feels as though it's quite different. And, at some point, 15 years from now, Brent, when you're still doing your 7x7s, people go, well, oh man, that guy's still doing it, isn't he? So we believe in this stuff. And I think that's where even my three coaches all had something similar. They were very skilled, very old school, and old school is just fine. I mean, it really is.
Yeah. How do you train this? Have you got one drill in particular that you feel works?
If you put me on the screen for a moment. And that's a good question.
Hold on for a sec here.
See, that's a big out step. She's got to stop.
All right, you're on the screen. Here you go.
Okay. So putting my hands in front of the screen, if I can put them there, you simply have to start a dialogue about whether or not, well, the screen doesn't show my hands, but.
Look. Okay. I can't get you on there singular.
Okay. The simplest way that I've done this is to put somebody exactly on the baseline, precisely, no tennis ball at all, and use the baseline divider to split their stance. And the wider they stand, the better. Absolutely. The wider they stand, the better. And then you practice going to the forehand. So if we're all right-handed, that means that you turn your hips towards the forehand side and you allow your right foot to drop beneath you. There's your drop step. And then your feet catch up and you move. And for me, I learned this on a golf course practicing my cuts when I was in Florida because I couldn't do it on a tennis court. If I watched the ball, I couldn't do my feet. And if I did my feet, I couldn't watch the ball. So this was a relearning process. But it feels as though if this is initiated soon enough, somebody can get it. And so the backhand, the drop step, the left foot drops beneath. But I think it's more that I can see it. I can see it at our club when certain people do it. I can see when people don't do it. And it's just, it's a story. And so Don Kerr's idea was that if you shuffle to the ball in his physical therapy business, that's called limping. But if you practice limping enough, you can do it. I bet you don't limp.
Try not to. So, well, I know what you mean about shuffling. I think there's a lot of misunderstanding with the shuffling. I mean, obviously there's some part where you maybe shuffle side to side to recover because you're not quite sure what you're about to get, if the ball's going to be in your right or at your body to your left. But I see lots of players who the first step as they move over to play a forehand or backhand is a sidestep shuffle.
Yeah.
And it, maybe on the jab step, I suppose the ball's close to you, but you don't really get turned when you do that. And that's a habit that I brought with me to see Tom, and it was no bueno. He was not allowing it. So Bobby's got
you were an infielder in baseball, right?
I was.
Shortstops never shuffle to the ball.
Yeah,
doesn't
no,
exist. Right. And outfielders don't shuffle. So this gets into something worse, and that is really dogma or groupthink. Really, we just sort of adopt these ideas, whether or not they even match. And for a while, I worked with a guy in Livermore, John White, who wrote a fascinating book, Batting Basics, and he was all about physics, and he wanted to write a tennis book. We never did it because he said that every sports book makes physics errors. And I think that in this regard, we tried something at Stanford to measure this with limited success, if any success at all. But it feels to me that this is more efficient. So here's the story. I present this in New York. It was kind of fun. I thought it went well. Jim Verdick, who comes up afterwards, says, "Nice work, kid. I teach the same stuff." Okay, fair enough. Then somebody else comes up and says, "I didn't want to interact because you're all wrong." Oh, okay. And I said, "What do you mean?" And this person said, "Well, I'm that player's coach, and he never did what you just said he did." And so then this coach demonstrated the move that they believed in was a very narrow stance and a lot of push on the ground. And the video showed something else, and it might even be that no one could see it because it didn't make sense. And even there's a player that played at Stanford that was so quick at this. And I was talking with the tennis coach there, and the coach even said, "Yeah, I have a problem with the step because mentally you want to get closer to the ball so the jab will get you farther with your feet, but not your body." So anyway, you've lost viewers right now, Brent.
Started doing that in 1999 when I got my first domain. So, Mac, Bobby's got an interesting comment here. He said, Bill Tim would always pose this question: what is the difference between offense and defense in tennis? The difference has to do with balance and transfer of weight and body rotation, right? Thus, it's all about footwork.
Wow. Offense and defense. I mean, is defense when you're running farther or when you're taking some speed off the ball?
Well, I mean, to me, the difference between offense and defense is offense is simply how quickly can you get onto their shot and be able to take time away. And to me, offense is not about anything more than taking time away. Look, I mean, you might be able to take time away and hit a big shot. You might be able to take time away and hit just a regular standard no-nothing shot, but it still robs them of time. So for me, that is all about balance.
Well, so if you're trying to move forward to take something early, I used to struggle with turning and sidestepping to that ball. And I can remember that Tom had a drill where you actually had to turn your shoulders, but not your hips, so you could get there more easily. But I think more of this came 2 years after Tom, because this Don Kerr guy was just so influential about stuff. But to my awareness, I started to move much easier. And even I used to practice it in lessons. I felt very good about being in my 40s and 50s and running with any student, because each time they didn't hit it to me, I could practice it. So who knows? I think that anybody that's watching this will be able to see somebody somewhere and you say, there you go. And they'll also see the opposite, where somebody is very slow or effortful to the ball. And so this project was huge because there's an American champion, I won't name, who many times would take a jab step to the ball and not take another step. No running at all. Meaning it was an awareness that they either didn't get to the ball or couldn't get to the ball. And many times the jab step is how you stop, not how you start. So anyway.
I like that. I've got we lost one of our all-time favorite people recently. I'm sure you've heard about Gene Canton.
No, I didn't know.
My gosh, I'm sorry to do this live to you. He passed away. I think it was February 26th, suddenly. But Gene was a Stowe student and really taught me a lot back when I started playing tennis, quite a bit in my early, about 23 or 24, back in like 70, 71 at the Berkeley Tennis Club. And Gene was like one of the top guys in Northern California at the time.
He was.
And you must have spent a little time with Gene, no?
I played him in a tournament once in Santa Rosa. I spent some time at Berkeley with him, and then he contributed to the Tom Stowe material that we wrote about Tom.
Okay.
And I think that he said that he learned most of this by being a hitting partner of Jim McLennan, I think.
Okay.
But this is just all tennis history and California tennis, because even when you talk so much about taking time away, that's a rare concept. You don't read about that in our online world much. They take time away by hitting it harder, not by changing the court.
Right.
And I think even what I'm trying to do in describing Shea Suway is that she has more a sense of how to use the court than how to bust the ball. And the fun is, and I've been watching this a lot, when I watch some videos of McEnroe, it's crazy how he played and how simple his strokes were, how quick he was to the ball, and how bad the opponents look, especially when they get in their 40s, 50s, and 60s. I went and filmed him up in Sacramento, and it was just, he was toying with Jim Courier. I'll probably get a call from Jimbo today about this, but he was just sort of chipping it and cutting it and blocking it. And so it just depends how you approach the game. The court matters.
Good. Well, listen, essentialtennisinstruction.com is where people can find you. What are you guys working on right now? Anything? I know you put out a fantastic monthly, I don't know, what do you call it? Newsletter. It's more than that. A lot of information.
I'm doing a lot more work on really an application of whether biomechanics really is about being smooth. I do a lot of work on the serve and rhythm, but I think that in a way our world is awash with coaching material, and I'm slower to know what to say or do because there's so much out there, and the viewers have to work their way through what the coach is about, whether it's doable, and so forth and so on. And so I guess what I can't do online as much as I do in person is I'm doing a lot more language-less lessons. That's my kind of fun. And I talk with Bill Stry, and you know Bill for sure. Mm-hmm. And he made the same comment to me that he thought, perhaps there's more available if you say less. But it's, this is fun, and I'm going to stay at it. But I haven't had any breakthroughs in a while, Brent. I'm looking for one, but I may not find it this morning, Maybe tomorrow.
Well, maybe we should go back to those few days in Memphis when you showed up with, I don't know, I thought it was a Cadillac convertible. Top didn't go back up, but a pot of coffee.
Yeah.
And
well,
you kept telling me that Bill Tilden's secret was to bring a pot of coffee out and just kind of work through it.
Where's your Jerry McEwen? Remember him?
Sure.
Well, I wonder if he's still there.
Well, I don't know if he's still at Stonebridge, but
that was Stonebridge. Yeah.
Yes, Stonebridge.
A lot of water under that bridge, Brent. Let's leave the water alone, okay?
Okay.
All right.
All right, Mac. Thank you for your time this morning. Really appreciate it.
All right.
Always fun. And I'm going to hold you to it. You said before we went live that you're going to start your own podcast and that I'm going to be a guest on there. So I'm going to keep bugging you about that because I think that you'd have quite a following.
Well, there you have it.
Okay, all right. Guys, look, you can find Jim over at essentialtennisinstruction.com. Don't know how much you're doing on Facebook these days. I don't see you too much over there. So probably the best thing is to, what's your email? Is it Jim at
essentialtennisinstruction.com?
Okay. Guys, with that said, any comments, any feedback, any questions down below in the comments area? You can direct message me at Facebook. You can shoot me an email, brent@webtennis.com. Mac, thanks so much. Really, really appreciate your time.
Okay. Enjoy the day.
All right, guys, get out there today. Help someone else have a spectacular day, guys. I'll see you again tomorrow morning. We got Jeff Jacklich teed up for tomorrow morning, and Jeff is going to go through what he's doing off court to get ready for the upcoming Wilson World Classic, which starts March 4th. Guys, I will see you again tomorrow.